I guess I'll do a brief introduction. I'm a little tired right now. It's 9 o'clock in Minnesota, but I'm super happy to be here with all of you. My name is Kira Hardy. I'm the coordinator for the Beginning and Young Alaskan Farmers Network, which is hosted by Alaska Farmers Market Association. And yeah, this is the last scheduled farmer Skillshare session, and Brandi Jo is going to be presenting on spreadsheets and formulas and crop planning. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, Brandi Jo. Like, anything that I can glean of how organized you have to be with the amount of things are going on in your world, like if I can just absorb an ounce of it, will improve my life. So give me the knowledge, Brandi Jo. Take it away.
Thanks, Kara. Yeah, I'm Brandi Jo. I'm down in Palmer. I'll just give like a little background. I'm in Palmer. I used to live in Fairbanks, and then I left Fairbanks to kind of start my farm on a hobby farm property that my husband grew up on in Western rural New York. And definitely was like, this is what I want to do, want to keep doing it, but I want to be back in Alaska. And we came back and moved to Palmer, and I met a really wonderful woman named Phoebe Aurty. She's here too. And we started talking about how we could collaborate as farmers as we were each looking for our own property. And then we decided to just not collaborate as separate farms, but collaborate as farmers on one farm. So I co-own and co-run Sauntering Roots Farm with Phoebe Aurty, who's also on the call. So maybe afterwards, if we have questions and stuff, if there's anything that I don't know or you want to ask the both of us, she's here too. Don't want to put her on the spot, but hmm.
Oh, I'm happy to. Sorry.
Okay. I was like, no, did you say anything? And oh, sorry, I muted myself. We do a small scale, tillage to break ground, not really very much after that. Diversified vegetable and herbs. We do a CSA, and then we grow for the Matanuska Community Farmers Market, which she and I and another female farmer also started, and I manage the market. And that is who we grew for last year, and this year basically the same. We're hoping to do like very little restaurant sales. We grow like a lot of garlic and shallots, which other people in the area don't grow. We're hoping to maybe sell those through some other outlets, but the market's really busy. So we sell a lot through there, but I can go ahead and get started. I'm gonna share my screen with you all. And if anybody has a question while I'm talking, I mean, you can use the raise hand feature, but you can also just take your microphone off and say whatever to interrupt me. I am not bothered by that at all. Oops. Okay. I guess I could have had this up when I introduced myself. I'm Brandi Jo, Sauntering Roots Farm, co-owner. This is for the Beginning and Young Farmers Network of Alaska, and I'm talking about spreadsheets and crop planning. And I also want to preface this by saying, like how I got into like my spreadsheets. Yeah, so in 2020, I started my farm. The same year, I had a baby, sold all my CSA shares, and then COVID happened, and I was doing the farm by myself. And I like really didn't sleep that year. It just was a lot, a lot, a lot. And I was super, I don't want to say I was disorganized, but I just didn't have the tools to be organized in terms of crop planning. Like I was doing everything with paper and pencil, which there's nothing wrong with that. But when you're doing a lot of succession planting and um, it's really hard to do it all on pencil and paper. And I was like drawing out my crop maps, and I just was like I also was of the mindset that like, oh, I have more time than I have money, so I won't buy the fancy tools. I'll just use my time. And like I said, I also had a baby that year, and I quickly realized, actually, I don't have time. I'm willing to spend the money to get some of these tools, like a Jang seeder or whatever, some of the nicer cultivation tools. And I also invested in the farm got like right when that Jean-Martin Fortier Market Gardener Masterclass came out. Um, I took that because I heard that that was really a great course for spreadsheets and planning, which is what I felt like I needed in my life. So that's where a lot of these spreadsheets originated. And I've kind of made them, you know, a little bit different throughout the years. And it's not like he's doing anything crop planning wise that other farmers aren't doing, but it was nice to see like how it was set up on spreadsheets and whatnot. So I did want to preface it by saying that. Okay. I thought it'd be nice to start talking about kind of the order of operations of how we crop plan, which we usually start, I don't know, I think this year we started a little early. But we create a game plan. It's just where we'll sit down and go through, we have a list of all of our crops and talk about which crops do we want to grow? What varieties do we want to grow? Do we want to grow them for market, for the CSA? Do we want to grow a lot of them for personal use, for, root cellar storage now that I went to that talk and I'm going to be so much better at storing my root vegetables? How often do we want to grow those crops? Like, how many times do we want them in the CSA? How many do we want to bring them to market every week? How many do we want to bring each time we do bring them to market? And then from there, we'll create a direct seeding calendar, which also we include tasks that need to be done after seeding, like maintenance. And I'll get into the nitty-gritty details of these. And then we create a seed starting or propagation and transplanting calendar. And we do the same thing, like what tasks need to be done before or after transplanting. And then we create a seed order, and then we create crop maps through space and time. And inevitably, sometimes you have to go back to that original game plan. If you realize, oh, I don't have enough space for everything. Okay, let's decrease, one of these or the other. And something that we use to help us with all of this is like an informational crop chart, which is really great if you can create yourself with numbers based off of, your yields and your situation wherever you are. But there are so many books that have informational crop charts that are like great to use as a starting point or as a goal. Like, you might see in one book or another that like somebody gets, X pounds of arugula off of 100-foot bed. And maybe you're not there yet, but that's a good goal to get to. But using a chart, it's so helpful because with spacing and everything like that, it's like impossible to remember all the details of every crop. And this is just something for you all to have later. So our informational crop chart, which I'll show you here in a sec, we have the number of rows per bed. We use a 30-inch bed system. We put the spacing on the row, the days to maturity, the average harvest window for that particular crop, days in the field, either from direct seeding or transplanting, all the way till the end of harvest. How many days that particular crop is in a soil block or a cell tray, the average yield per bed, either in bunches or pounds or units, and then we also put the cost per unit, which then we can later use that to like help us figure out, our estimated revenues for the year. So here's our crop chart. You can see here we got carrots. For our, we do different spacings for baby carrots versus regular size or storage. So how many rows we do per bed, they're always 2 inches apart. The days to maturity, you can see there's a 20-day difference here on the varieties. Our harvest window is usually about 3 weeks. Total days in the garden, you can see differs between these two carrot varieties. Carrots are never in a soil block. We direct seed them. And then our average yields per 50-foot bed, which you can see also varies a lot between the baby carrots and the regular storage carrots. And we charge $5 a bunch. And then so based on our yields, we can glean about that much from a 50-foot bed. We use 50-foot beds. And again, this is just like we reference it a bajillion times throughout the whole crop planning process. So it's just really great to have a chart like this that you know, can build through time.
Is that printed, or are you like referencing it on your phone and things, or like how are you using it most?
That's a great question, Kira. One of the many reasons I love farming with a partner, is that we usually have both of our laptops open, and like, you know, I'm on the game plan, she's on the crop chart, or vice versa. And it's like, or, you know, people work with two computer screens. I don't have two computer screens, but I do have a farming partner, and Phoebe usually has one page open and I have the other, and we just kind of go back and forth. But we always talk about printing it and like putting it in a nice little sleeve, which would be a great idea to do. Okay, so the first thing we do is make a game plan. Like I said, it's like, what do you want to do this year? What varieties do you want to grow? What crops? How much do you want to grow of them? How often do you want them? And once you know quantities, with that informational crop chart, you know, when you're knowing your spacing and how many rows per bed, you figure out like how much bed feet you need per succession, and you kind of work backwards, like is what we do. If we know, okay, well, we want arugula for sure by the first market date, which is, you know, the 12th of June. Okay, from direct seeding, how many days is arugula in the field? 28 days. Then we go to like, all right, we need to seed it on this date. And I'm going to show you that on here as well. And another tool. So here, this is our, like, how we do the game plan, which you can see there's a lot of notes, like arugula. We're going to do Esme in the spring and Astro in the fall, because we have a note here that the Astral bolts very easy in the spring. We both have grown Esme before, and it doesn't seem to bolt as much in the spring. We know we want to do 2 successions in the spring, 2 successions in the fall. We want to bring 10 to 15 bags to market when we do have it, and we want to put it in the CSA at least 2 times. And then so here we've got our days in the field. So this is based off of, if I go to this crop chart, arugula, it's a 28 days to maturity, a 14-day harvest window. We usually get about 2 weeks of harvest. And then, so it's in the garden for 42 days. Oh, a bunch of us are joining right now because we used a link that did not work for this meeting. Uh-oh.
Sorry about that, Margaret.
Luckily, like everything is in the presentation, like not the actual spreadsheets, but the information.
And this is recorded too, so it will eventually
Oh
come
yeah.
out.
Okay. There's one more chat. Let me just check it. She said no problem. Okay, so looking at arugula. Okay, yeah, so we've got 4 successions. This is how many beds we want in each succession. And then, like I said, we work backwards, and we use this. If you're not familiar with like this time and date calculator, just Google time and date calculator, and this is the first thing that will come up. So like I said, say our first market is June 12th. Might want to harvest a couple days earlier. So, okay, I want my arugula by June 10th. It's got a 28 days to maturity. So I do 28 days subtracted from that, and my new date is May 13th. That's when I know I need to direct seed my arugula by. A lot of times in the spring, I'm sure you all familiar with like the soil's a little colder, temperatures are a little colder, sometimes things grow a little slower. So we're gonna seed ours on the 8th of May instead of the 13th, just to give a little bit of extra leeway. But this time and date calculator, this is like the other tab we always have open when we're crop planning, because who can do that in their heads? I mean, I guess, you know, you could have a calendar open and be flipping back and forth between the pages, but this does it all for you. And I'll go back to that crop plan. Yeah, and the same thing for transplanted crops. On the game plan, we put the day that we want to transplant the crop. We're not worried about when we need to seed it yet. We're going to figure that out later. We just want to know when it needs to be in the field. So for beets, like, which we actually transplant our beets, which a lot of people think is unusual, but we do it because we get early beets and then we don't have to worry about, you always have to thin beets because so many beets come up from one seed and then they're all with the chickweed. So we transplant them. And we know we want to transplant our first succession on May 4th. And then from there, we do a direct seeding calendar. So we use the dates to maturity to calculate backwards from when we ideally want to begin harvesting a crop, which, like I said, we've already done that in that game plan. And we also enter important tasks like cultivation, amending, or thinning, because I mentioned that first year when I was farming and I was just like, I was in over my head. I was doing way too much. I was doing everything by myself and I had like a baby a few months before the season started. And I realized that most of the time when I started to do a task, it was already like when the task should have been done like a week or two ago. So I was always like, I was never cultivating, I was always weeding. And that if I could give myself like a rough time frame of like, oh, just like you should seed this on this date, you should bring the flex tine weeder through that, or you should bring the stirrup hoe through that on this date. Like anything that I could tell myself in advance when I wasn't really busy during the season was going to help me. And Kira, I thought of that at the beginning of the meeting when you said any bit of organization that you can like glean is helpful. For me, that I think is the most helpful, is calculating like some of those tasks ahead of time so that I don't have to think about them during the summer because my head's in too many different directions. And there's just a Google Sheets formula for y'all to have later if you want to make a sheet. But so I will go to the direct seeding calendar. We'll go to those beets. Oh no, sorry, we don't direct seed beets. We'll do carrots. Carrots, our first carrot succession. We're doing this ya variety. It's our succession number 1, 2 beds. And we already know from the game plan that we want to seed it on this date. And then we've got our days to maturity and our harvest window, which gives us the total time in the field. And you can just, yeah, Google Sheets are great. And then carrots, we like to, in an ideal world, prep the bed and cover it with row cover and water it before we seed the carrots, like 7 to 10 days ahead of time. And then like directly before we seed the carrots, when all those little baby chickweed are coming up, we take the flame weeder to it. So here we have our first task is to prep the bed and cover with row cover and water. And that's for this first succession, 7 days before seeding it. So in theory, that should be done on April 30th. Don't know if that's going to happen, but in theory, if we could, we will. And so that's just a formula telling us whatever this day is, add this number, which here is -7. And then we've got our second task, flame weed when the beets emerge. If you put beets on one end and then, the beets are going to come up before the carrots. We actually don't do this though. It's like we always talk about doing it, but we use the Jang seeder and it kind of seeds like kind of shallow, and we're just a little too worried that we're going to burn some of the carrot seeds, so we don't do that. But then here, we're going to thin and hand weed 20 days after the seeding date. So you'll see this is just that original date plus this W10, which gives us, all right, on May 27th, we've got to thin and hand weed the carrots. Any questions so far? I feel like this is really dry stuff. It's like spreadsheets, and now we're gonna get into math.
Can I interrupt you to ask you what flame weed is?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's basically a blowtorch for your garden beds. I mean, it's not a blowtorch. It's like they sell specific flame weeders, but they make like a backpack flame weeder that which is what we have. Or it's like a backpack of propane. And
Oh.
we just go down the row with the flame weeder. It feels it's really satisfying, especially when there's like all the baby chickweed coming up and you're just like, die, chickweed.
That's
And
cool.
it's
Wow.
great to do just like most weeding, it's really good to do, you know, on a hot day and
Yeah.
just get all those little babies killed. But they also make really nice flame weeders that are like made for the 30-inch bed system where it's a backpack and then it like there's a wheel on either side of the bed and there's many flames and you push it across. Would be way faster than our version, but that other
That's
version is
cool.
really expensive.
And then for row cover, is it like floating row cover or is it like the black
Yeah,
stuff?
just the floating row cover like the Agrabah
Mm,
or whatever it I think is the brand name. Um, just getting that soil, you know, wet and warm for those carrot beds and just getting all that chickweed to germinate beforehand so that we have less weeding to do with the carrots. Because as you know, chickweed can take over anything really quickly. Um, I have heard of people, I've always wanted to try it, but I have never tried it. I have heard of with carrots specifically, people using silage tarps upside down after they seed the carrots. So we use row cover, like after we seed the carrots, we put the row cover back on and water it in just to keep that warmth and moisture in there for the carrots to germinate better. But I've heard of people using silage tarps upside down to do that, um, which I've never tried, mainly because they're so much harder to lug around. But thanks. Yeah, any other questions, just pop on. All right, getting into the transplant calendar. Here's my little note because I don't know if anybody here likes math. I kind of do like math, which is maybe why I really enjoy crop planning. Um, but for the transplant calendar for each succession of the crop, we use our expected transplant date and the time in the soil block or cell to work backwards to calculate a seeding date. And we use the number of rows per bed, the spacing on the rows, the bed size, which our beds are 50 feet long, which is 600 inches, and our tray size to calculate how many trays per bed. And so we use trays that my husband makes. We use soil blocks mostly, and we get 80 soil blocks in one tray. They're trays that I used at Calypso Farm when I worked there, and then I was like, make this for me. My husband's a carpenter, so he does a lot of stuff like that for us. And then we also use like 128 trays for instance, beets. Like I said, we transplant beets and we like to grow a lot of beets. So things like beets and salad turnips, we start in 128 trays. And then when you're doing all this math, you can also add in security because we all know not every seed germinates and not everything that you know, plant is going to turn into something you're going to eat. And then we use the amount of beds and bed feet that we need in order and number of trays per bed to determine how many we need to seed, how many soil blocks we need to seed. And then just like the direct seeding calendar, we add in tasks that follow seeding and transplanting. So just an example, and yeah, like I said, I know that some of this is like kind of dry, but just like the math is really where the crop planning is. And I'm using green onions as an example on a 50-foot bed with 600 inches. Can you all see this where I'm pointing? Can somebody pop on?
yeah.
Oh, somebody said, are you making your own soil blocks? Yes, we do make our own soil blocks. We have two stand-up soil blockers. And we just block away. And we have a handheld soil blocker that my 4-year-old does his own soil blocks. But we don't make our own potting mix. We use like a pro mix mixed with fishy peat, kind of a 50-50 mix. All right. So for our green onions, which we grow in clumps of like 4 to 6 green onions in one clump. So we put that many seeds in one soil block. We grow 5 rows on a 30-inch bed, and on each row they're 6 inches apart. So you take 600 inches for the bed, divide it by 6 inches, and that's 100 plants per row. 5 rows gives us 500 plants per 50-foot bed. And then if we want to give ourselves a little security, which 1.3 is kind of a lot, but it gives us, you know, say we need 650 plants per bed, per 50-foot bed. And we need 650 plants per 50-foot bed. Our cell tray size, we get 80 soil blocks per tray. That means we need 8.125 trays per 50-foot bed. And say for a succession, we need 0.32 of a bed, just like that much. So we times that by how many trays for a full bed, meaning we need 2.6 trays for that succession. And I'll show you that on our seeding and transplant calendar. Let's see, let's go to those green onions. Did I already pass them? No, here they are. So here, green onion, we like the parade variety, our first succession, we do need 0.32 beds. And if we go back to that game plan, we decided that we wanted to transplant green onions on the 1st of May. And so this date right here, we need to seed them on the 12th of March. We already did it. We did it on Monday, on the 11th. But you see, this is just a formula. So because the number of days that green onions are in a soil block, we do 50 days. So this is basically, this formula right here is just this original date, N76 minus L76. So working backward, 50 days before we want to direct seed them, or sorry, transplant them. And we've got our rows and spacing on the row here. You can see just all that math is in here. And I won't it would be really boring for me to go and talk about that. That's why I provided all of this in there so that you could plug and chug stuff like that if you do decide to make spreadsheets.
I'm into the plug and chug. Thank you. But it's
Yeah.
crazy that the sorry, that makes me laugh. The N whatever that's like a date and
Yes.
you're minusing 50 days from that.
Mm-hmm.
Google can do that, like a date?
Yes.
Seems wild to me.
Which is how all of our spreadsheets work. I mean, a lot of times we're using this. We use this tool right here, the date calculator, for when we just want to know, okay, if we want to have broccoli in the CSA on this, around this time frame, when do we need to seed that succession of broccoli? But once we figure out all that stuff, the spreadsheets do it for us. You can just use a date like you would a number, which is pretty cool.
That is really cool. I didn't know that power of spreadsheets.
Now you do. And then you can see we've got, we don't, so onions, if any of you trim the tops of your onions before you transplant, you see we've got our onions. We need to trim the tops on, April 24th, because we've got, this right here is this date. We're going to transplant it. We need to trim the tops 1 week before we transplant it. So it's just using that date formula again. And then, the green onions, we want to cultivate them 14 days after we transplant them. So yeah, just using the formulas with the dates and days. Pretty cool.
So you're referencing these spreadsheets every single day and you're just looking for dates to highlight this is what I need to do this day.
No, well, sort of, yes, but getting into it further, you got to get it to organize everything chronologically. So we make a task calendar, which organizes everything chronologically from okay, these are the things we need to seed in the propagation house. And then it starts getting into start direct seeding and transplanting, but organizing everything by date. But we don't start by date, we start by crop. That would have to be like a part 2 of the talk. Because I didn't prepare for that, only because I didn't want to have like talk for 2 hours.
Fair enough.
But great question. Yeah. More math. So once you figure out everything you're going to plant, you need to make a seed order, which is more math. And again, like that first year, I was just like, how much seed do I need? I don't know. Let me just order this much and hope that it's enough. Oh, Phoebe said in the comments, we also have a giant calendar we can easily see each day. Yeah, so we have like multiple forms of like, we print out, let me show you this other sheet that we create. We print this out, which we create just like actually as we're making our crop map, our like physical visual crop map, we have this open as well, so that we're like can just print this out and we know to keep it in the propagation house. And also then we have like a big calendar which has all of our tasks, like the cultivation tasks that we've put in those spreadsheets, and when to transplant this and when to seed that, and all those things. There's many steps, because it's so easy to forget something. And so we have a lot of security, I guess is the right word.
So can I ask a question again?
Of course.
You have like a physical calendar in like your community space that you fill in by hand?
Yes. Which honestly, I don't know that like we would need, but I feel like Phoebe and I like to do things like that. Like sit down and put out a big calendar. And also like, I don't know, I get extremely forgetful in the season. And like I said, it's nice to have it in multiple places where it's like, okay, if I don't open that folder today and see that 3 things need to be direct seeded and 2 things need to be transplanted, I might not do those things because I might get to the farm and be like, oh my gosh, look at this needs done, and then start doing it. But if we have that big calendar up too, I'm like, it's eyeing me every day, and I can anticipate, and Phoebe as well, just like what all needs to be done. And look, and it's like I said, that first year, I just was always doing stuff like when it was too late, where it was like, oh, it would have taken so much less time if I would have done this task earlier. And with that calendar, it's like, oh, maybe I don't have enough time this one day to do my other task that needs to be done today. But I see in 3 days, I'm supposed to do flex time those greens, and I have 5 minutes to do that. So I just get that done and then check it off on the calendar. And there are things that get like looked over and never done or done late because that's just the way farming is. But I feel like it helps us a lot to stay on top of things. And Phoebe said it's nice to not have to pull up a spreadsheet every day too. Yeah. And Margaret said, is this in an open area or a high tunnel? We don't have a high tunnel. We're in Palmer, so we do get, well, we don't get hot weather like Fairbanks, but we do get some nice sunshine. We have yeah, okay, you're in Ketchikan. I thought I remember you being in Southeast. We don't have a high tunnel. We do have a caterpillar tunnel, which last year we had a very jankety caterpillar tunnel. And this year we already have it purchased. It's not up yet, but we have a Farmer's Friend 50-foot caterpillar tunnel, and we hope to have more like that in the future. And we really would like to have a high tunnel, but we don't want to get a high tunnel until we know we can heat it, because that's just how we feel about a high tunnel here. If we would use it for tomatoes. Great question. Okay, ordering seeds, which is more math. So we have a formula for that too. So you use seeds per unit, which is usually 1, but for things like onions or shallots or green onions, sometimes the seeds per unit are more. So for instance, here's 1 soil block. Right here, I'm seeding green onions. So I'm going to put 5 or 6 of these in each soil block. And so that's like, we'll say 6 seeds per unit. And just to make sure that you're ordering enough seeds so that you don't plan each of those as 1 seed per green onion. That wouldn't be very many green onions. And then we also use rows per bed, spacing on the row, the bed size, 50-foot beds, and how many beds total of that crop or that variety we're doing that season to get the number of seeds we needed. And we also add security then as well, because it's a bummer to run out of seed when you're direct seeding it in the ground and it needs to be done. So using carrots as an example, bolero carrots, those are 1 seed per unit. We do 5 rows of that variety on 2-inch spacing on the row. We have 50-foot beds, which are 600 inches. So we're going to do 600 divided by 2 is 300 carrots per row times 5 rows, 1,500 carrots. Like I said, they're 1 seed per unit, so we don't need to change anything there. We need 5.75 beds total for the season of that variety, which gives us 8,625 seeds, but we want to add a little bit of security. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. So if we times that by 1.2, giving us like a 20% security, we get 10,350 seeds. And I'll show you that here on the.
Hey, Brandi, quick question for you.
Yes.
How wide are each of your rows?
We do 30-inch beds.
Cool.
And then our
Yes.
pathways are like, what if our pathways are 15 inches, I think, Phoebe?
Yes,
Good.
they are.
Do you
And
guys go ahead?
Go ahead, Jessica.
Do you guys mulch those or put down sawdust to reduce your weed growth?
Well, in theory, um, we,
Yes.
yes, so we do like in-ground raised beds, which I mentioned earlier, like our seeding trays directly come from Calypso. I worked there in Fairbanks and just love the they have like their pathways are like lower than the beds, and it's great for drainage. It's great to help warm the soil in the spring, and it's like 4 to 6 inches less that you have to bend down. It's just like the perfect little spot for my knees or my butt when I'm weeding or working on a crop. I love the beds like that. So some of the pathways, like last year, we have a mushroom grower. It's about like a 30-minute drive from here, and we can get all of their spent grain. We were like, let's mulch all the pathways with the spent grain and we'll get mushrooms coming up and it'll be so good for the soil. But, the farming season happens, and like I think we did like 5 or 6 beds and we did get some cool mushrooms in the pathways and it worked well. We didn't have to weed those pathways as much, but we also do just like a straight up stirrup. We do a lot of flame weeding in pathways as well.
Yeah.
And I think like we talked about, our strategy now is kind of like, yeah, really working. We have eventually want to have living pathways, which is another thing that I loved working at Calypso. I just like was working, I like to work barefoot and not be like sloshing through the mud in the rain season and having like a low growing clover. I love living pathways. But in order to have like good living pathways, we feel like we need to really be on top of the weeds first. So we're trying to use this combination of mulching and flame weeding and just cultivation to really get on top of the weeds before we go and spread a bunch of clover seed everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, or you could just keep putting down mushroom spent grain and have something to harvest in between each of your rows.
Yeah, I know. It's just so much work, and they come in these like plastic bags.
Mhm.
And it creates like some nasty trash because it's like a lot of time we're picking them up. It's old, it's rained, and they're
Mhm.
really stinky. Like we did a couple runs last year, and then like neither Phoebe or I were able to eat mushrooms for like a while because they smelled like mushrooms, but like mushrooms gone bad. And it was just a lot of work to do it. So somebody said we did micro clover for our pathways last year and it was terrible for the slugs. Oh, Kaylee, good to know. The slugs are also, yeah. We did some mulching on our some of our long-term brassicas, like our kale and our collards and broccoli and cauliflower. And then yeah, the bottom leaves of our kale were getting just destroyed. It was a really bad slug year this past season in general in Palmer, just like horrible. And I was like, I'm gonna tear back Phoebe and I talked about like we gotta figure it out. And we pulled back um the straw. I was there and I just sent Phoebe a picture of like one spot in the soil where it was like probably 10 slugs all huddled together. It was just like that everywhere. So good thinking on the clover. Maybe the flame weeder's the way to go. But yeah, it's nice to be able to like feed the soil, which is and prevent erosion. Okay, the seed order sheet. What did I just use as an example? I used the Bolero carrots. So here, let's go to those carrots. You can see we grow 3 varieties of carrots. In the Bolero, 1 seed per unit. We're doing 5.75 beds. We use 5 rows, 2-inch spacing. Here's our security, and that's how many seeds we need. And you can see it's just what is in that sheet. 600 divided by 2, times 5, times whatever, or times how many beds we're doing, times our security, times 1 seed per unit. But then I'll just show you, say for instance, shallots. We love shallots, and we joke that we're the premier shallot growers in the state of Alaska, mainly because we don't think anybody else grows them. So even though we don't grow a ton of shallots, we grow more than most. Somebody said, have you tried the flame on the slugs? Yeah, we do. We flame weed the slugs. I mean, it's hard when there's already a crop there. We don't want to burn the crop, but yeah, the slugs are just they're really bad, but I do think that in the flame weeding the pathways and the beds before planting stuff helps. Okay, so shallots. Shallots are 3 seeds per unit. That's just to show you an example of that because we put 3 shallot seeds per soil block. Did you show the categories at the top? Of course. So we've got our vegetable, our seeds per unit, our which variety that we're growing, because we grow a lot of different varieties. On the first Skillshare, Kenneth was like, focus on 5 crops. That's the best way to be profitable. And I feel like Phoebe and I are kind of the opposite. You can see we grow every crop and we grow so many varieties of each crop. But it's just different styles. Like we grow for a CSA, so we have to have a lot of variety. But also I feel like she and I both get so much joy from like having that diversity in a garden. It's beautiful, and then you get to go out and there's so many things you can eat for dinner. But then yeah, the beds, rows per bed, spacing on the row, the security, and then giving us how many seeds. And we also keep note of where we got the seeds from, so the next year we can remember. And we also make notes of like, oh, we really like pelleted seeds, or remember to make notes on harvest. Any kind of stuff that we need to remember.
I have a question for how
Yes.
the formula in the seeds
Yes.
have like whatever that was like 80 some odd cells. Are you plugging in that formula like 80 times, or is there
Oh,
like a
no.
way to expedite
Oh,
that?
the beauty of the one of the beauties of this and like having all these formulas is you put the formula in the first one
Yeah.
and you drag it down like this,
Uh-huh.
and it drags the formula down and it changes it to correspond to what row you're on. So you only have to put in the formula once.
Amazing.
Yeah, oh my gosh, no. Then the spreadsheets wouldn't make it any easier.
Right. Okay.
And the same goes for like when you were asking about like, oh, you're using a date and then like that number 10. Yeah, whenever that formula is in there, you take that and then you drag it down and it puts it in for all of them.
That's a hot tip. Thanks.
You're welcome. Yeah, I'm not like crazy savvy with spreadsheets, Google spreadsheets, but I feel like I'm just savvy enough to make it work. If you ever have small questions, there's usually an easy way to do things. Okay, next, the thing that we do is we make a crop map through space and time, which sounds like super groovy, but it's just that the visual shows us how much space it's taking up and how much time it's going to be in the garden bed. And for each crop, I'll show you, but you got to have some information about the crop, like what succession is it? What variety is it? How many beds are in this succession and what dates is it in the garden? And so we use a vertical to represent space in the bed and horizontal to represent time. And I will show you that right now. And so we grow at 2 spots. So we have 2 crop maps. And so here's Phoebe's house. And so if we're looking up here, we can see these radishes, number 1, are one of the first things that go in the ground. It's one bed. You can see this vertical. It's covering one whole bed. And then you can see we've got these months here. I don't even know why we have April in there. That's left over from when I farmed elsewhere. It's in the ground from May 1st to June 12th. So you see this represents time right here. Which that visual then helps us when we're like, oh, we have something that needs to go in the ground on the 12th. Do we have where can we put that? We're gonna put these green onions here because those radishes will, even if they're not all the way gone, by the 12th, most of the radishes will be gone. And then, it's really helpful to put the amount on the visual because when you're doing, like the green onions, how would we be able to tell this was 0.3 of a bed looking at that? I mean, we could tell from our spreadsheets, but it's just nice to have all the information you need everywhere. Sorry, I was just reading the chat. Yeah, and that is how we lay everything out. And the same thing goes for the other crop map. Everything is through space and time. And then here are some resources for crop planning. Everybody talks about Jean-Martin Fortier's The Market Gardener, which I love that book. And like I said, like I learned all about crop planning using spreadsheets through him. And he has a lot of really great crop information in that book, but I want to give recognition to like the 2 original books, which have so much information. How to Grow More Vegetables by John Jevons has a ton of information on harvest yields and soil inputs and all kinds of stuff. That's like one of my favorite farming books ever. And then there's the original, the OG, The New Organic Grower by Elliot Coleman. And The Market Gardener by Jean-Martin Fortier and The Urban Farmer by Curtis Stone. And this is not by any means like a list of like the only farming books you should read. This is just stuff that has really helpful crop planning information. There's a lot of really great other farming books. We were talking about some of them at the beginning, but like this just has specific crop planning stuff. And I mentioned before that informational crop chart. if you're, just starting, you might not have any idea. You're like, I don't know, what should I do my spacing at? Or I don't know, what will my yields be if I do this spacing? And your yields might be very different, but they're good to use as a reference. That's it. Does anybody have other questions? I know I just like talked a lot. My throat is dry.
Thank you. Wow. I'm curious how, like Kenneth first, the first Skillshare, I was thinking about like his cash flow, or he didn't actually really recommend a cash flow all that much, but these crop planning things, like I feel like the cash flow and the crop planning could kind of like come in hand and inform each other. Do you do that at all?
We do. Let me find that spreadsheet and I will share my screen. This is not updated for this year. So we haven't done this yet. We should probably add it to our to-do list. But so yeah. I haven't looked at this spreadsheet in a while, but I don't know how many beds of arugula, were on that. Let me see. Let's just say, let's do beets. If you look at our game plan, beets. Here we go. We've got 8.75 beds total of beets. We're growing a lot more beets this year because the beets are a hot commodity. And let me see if this is up to date, our yields, because we just recently updated our crop chart with like yields. Yeah, oh yeah, that's up to date. So in theory, oh, here we go. If we're getting 80 bunches per bed and we're still charging $5 per beets, our beds are $400 in value and we can make $3,500 off of beets. But yeah, so like Phoebe and I need to go and plug in all these numbers and see, because we make like budgeted every winter of like, okay, these are the things we need, like our spending, and then we just do, okay, how many CSA shares do we want to sell, full shares versus half shares, and then how much do we think we can make at each market? And then we add all that together. And then this is kind of like we can go through and fill this sheet in and be like, oh wow, we're pretty close to that number, or whoa, we're way off. So it just gives you an idea of like if you're growing the amount that you think you are. What is the mix you use for your soil blocks, and do you do different blends depending on the crop? We don't do different blends depending on the crop. We grow so many crops and we're seeding like many crops every day. I can stop sharing my screen again. So it would be really hard to do it different based on crops because we're just like mixing a big batch. And we use like a pro mix. And honestly, there's like a few pro mixes that we use. It's just like what is available at Alaska Mill and Feed. We order in bulk from Alaska Mill and Feed down in Anchorage, which we have the luxury of being able to drive to a place like that within an hour and get, and we mix it with fishy peat 50-50. And then some crops, I guess we add more like, so leeks are one that we don't do in soil blocks. We do in like a big 10 by 20 tray, and we just, do 3 rows and we put about like 100 leeks in each row. And then a couple times before we transplant the leeks, we'll go in and we'll put some like down to earth all-purpose mix and just kind of scratch it in around the leeks. And then when we're potting up, our tomatoes or peppers or whatever, we're also putting in like down to earth and maybe some more fishy peat and stuff, but we don't change it for the crops. Any other questions?
Question. Would you, do you consider, like, if we want to do companion planting, that seems like it would throw like a really big challenge for a lot of the spreadsheets and math and stuff. I'm wondering if you've played with that at all or thought about that.
Yeah, I actually did a lot of experimenting when I was farming in like Western rural New York with companion planting, also for pest control because there are so many more pests there. And it can definitely make crop planning harder, but if you just still plan each individual crop and say, you know, you need X amount of space for this crop and X amount of space for that crop, if you need half a bed for each crop, you know, you can kind of work like that. Or with we did some on our crop map, some interplanting. We're going to be doing some interplanting this year with something that I had luck with in the past, which is doing spinach on the outside rows. You know, peas only use like we do 2 rows down the middle, and then you've got all this bed space on the side. And we're doing like a row of spinach down each side. And so we do, I can't remember, but we'll just say 4 rows of spinach per 30-foot bed, and we have two beds of peas. And so with 2 beds of peas, we can get 1 row of spinach. And so we know, oh, that all adds up. And then with like green onions, I've transplanted them. Like you can kind of just like throw them in wherever, but it doesn't always work. I've had some success doing green onions in between beet rows, which is also good because there are some like the brassica family and beets. There's one like microorganism relationship that the brassica family and beets like can't form. And so if you can have other crops in at the same time or have those follow and precede the crops that can have those relationships, that's good. So I've done green onions like that to facilitate those. I don't remember what it is. Those still being in the soil. Last year, Phoebe and I tried interplanting our green onions with cauliflower and broccoli. It was a bad idea. If we were going to do that, we should have planted the green onions way earlier because the green onions mature so fast. But man, you know, with all that sunlight, the broccoli and cauliflower got so big, and our green onions just were really stunted, and then they got all floppy because they're growing up under a like a broccoli leaf. So it's always an experiment.
Do you think it's worth it in your experience doing companion planting for pest control? Like worth it in terms of the tidiness of harvesting and rows and planning and stuff?
I do. I think it's all about personal preference. Like I know for myself, and I don't want to speak for Phoebe, but you know, like we love a garden that looks beautiful. Like what, you know, it's fun to plant cabbages and be like green, purple, green, you know, like have it like checkerboard.
Yeah.
There's something like really beautiful in that. And then, you know, companion planting is really beautiful and can be beneficial for pollination and whatnot. I think it just depends on scale and the crop. Like I used to plant nasturtiums interplanted with cabbage. Cabbage was like one of my hardest crops in New York, and it's so easy here because everything wants to eat cabbage in New York, and just the Northeast in general. And nasturtiums really helped, and but it didn't affect my cabbage harvest. But for something like baby greens, there I don't want anything else in that bed. You know, I just want to go through and chop it down. Phoebe, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think like it's all about balance. I think and I think it depends on scale for sure. I do lean towards more of the like efficiency side of things and making everything very like locked in, but I also agree with Brandi Jo. It's like you have to have the joy in farming. And so having like that beautiful garden that has maybe like some nasturtiums on the end of the bed is like very like soul affirming. So I think it's just all about like your scale and maybe like picking a few interplanting experiments to have one year and maybe not trying to like do it with every single crop. But I do think it's worth it, especially when the pest question comes up.
Right.
I've done a little bit myself too.
Thanks.
How does your crop planning and all of your spreadsheets play into you being organized to receive or like go after grant funding? Like, do you call on your spreadsheets when you're like, is there like good numbers that you know you're like, I'm looking at this row to tell this story?
Maybe Phoebe will say differently. I don't think we really used our crop planning spreadsheets to help. Kira's talking about, Phoebe and I have had some luck with some small grants for the farm and then for the farmers market. But I mean, we talk about like basic numbers, like, but it's not really our crop planning spreadsheets. Mainly, I think it would depend on the grant. Like, although we did get the Ag West New Producers Grant, and they wanted not like crop planning spreadsheets, but business like financial spreadsheets, which we started off in the spring, with really great financial spreadsheets, and then by like July, like nothing's been updated since April. And so we had to sit down and really work on that. And I think just like probably because we're so used to working with the spreadsheets like this and working together, like, okay, you have this open, I'll have this open. It made it easier to do those financial sheets.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, if there aren't any other questions, I mean, feel free to email me or ask a super experienced farmer. Like the things that I talked about tonight are not things that only we do. And I probably so many farmers they use the same formulas because math is beautiful. There's like there's usually only one way to get to that number. Whereas, farming, there's many ways to get to the end. But crop planning is pretty straightforward, and there are way more experienced crop planners than me. Thanks, Phoebe just put our email in the chat.
Incorrectly, but you get the idea.
If it's a quick question only, could you show the nerds how to subtract a number of days from a date? Is that like a
Oh,
quick
yeah.
is that like a quick equation that you can click on and then we know how to do it?
You mean like on the time and date calculator?
But how to do it in Excel or Google Sheets?
Oh, yes. I'll go back to, let's go to the direct seating
Yes, Kaylee, thank you. I need
calendar.
to see that.
So, I'm not sharing my screen. I'm like going through it. I should share my screen. You said the subtraction, Kaylee. So here we'll look at the carrots again. So we've got our carrots, and this is the days that each of our carrot successions needs to be seeded in the ground. But before we seed them in the ground, we don't have this like totally filled out, I don't think. We need to prep the bed and cover it with row cover and water 10 days before that seeding date. So if we're looking at this, I'll just go to the first succession so it's like easy to see because it's the first carrots. We want to do that 7 days before May 5th. So it's this cell right here for the action date is just that original date cell, which in this case is E10 plus O10, which is just this cell right here. So you're not actually doing any subtraction in that formula. The formula does it for you because you've entered in a negative number. So you see it's like the same as this one right here, but because we've got a negative number, it does the subtraction for us. And then let's see. I've got that formula right here. I put it on this direct seeding calendar chart. It's hard to talk about formulas like not on the spreadsheets, but which is why I don't have like a bunch of the formulas on here, because, if I'm in E25 and yours is in G76, like it's really hard to have them match up, but this like general equation will work for that. And then when we're crop planning, I just use this, we use this time and date calculator to subtract or add days to a particular date.
Cool, thank you. I didn't realize it was gonna be that easy that you could just, yeah, I thought there was maybe more complicated settings that yeah, that's great. You can just subtract the number.
So easy. And
Cool.
yeah, the sheets are amazing. Yeah, the time, Megan Schultz, time and date calculator. What? I know, it's like the best. Really,
Yeah.
it might even be better than the spreadsheets.
The amount of times I have like, as a market manager, I've been like, all right, well, how many weeks are we open? And I'm like, 1, 2, 3. Oh, I messed up. Let me try again. Saving me. Okay, I've gotten a little bit further than 3 usually. But great tips.
Okay. Well, yeah, if anybody has other questions, feel free to reach out. Well, like I said, reach out to somebody who has been crop planning way longer than me. Because they're way more of a wealth of knowledge, but I do like a spreadsheet.
Thank you. It was nice meeting you.
Nice meeting you too. Everyone. Bye, Kara. Good to see you.
Thank you. That was a wealth of information.
Truly. Agreed.
Thank you, Shelley. Thanks.
Goodbye, everyone. Have a good night.